Welcome to Time Before Us, the channel where ancient history breathes again. Before time had a name, before the first human breath, there existed a world fierce, forgotten, and alive. Creatures of scale and silence, predators wrapped in feathers, titans that shook the earth, lives erased, bones buried beneath eternity. But they are not lost, they are waiting. This is Time Before Us, where prehistory worlds rise again, and the stories buried in stone finally speak. Chapter 1. The Clawed Nightmare. Therizinosaurus, the shadows of prehistoric Mongolia, where the wind howled across the sand dunes and the bones of ancient giants lay hidden beneath the desert floor. Paleontologists stumbled upon a mystery. One so strange it didn't even look like it came from a dinosaur. Long scythe-shaped claws, arms stretching out like grotesque mechanical cranes, no skull, no legs. Just the massive, terrifying forelimbs of a creature that seemed ripped from the imagination of a horror novelist. When scientists first uncovered the fossilized arms of Therizinosaurus in the 1940s, they weren't just puzzled, they were outright stunned. What kind of dinosaur had claws that reached nearly 3 feet long? What kind of predator needed weapons that size? It was easy to jump to conclusions. With talons like that, surely this was a fearsome killer, perhaps a rival to T-Rex, slicing prey with brutal efficiency. For years, it was thought to be some kind of turtle-like reptile, or even a strange carnivorous dinosaur that had evolved oversized weapons. But time and more fossil evidence would reveal a much more bizarre and far more fascinating truth, because Therizinosaurus, for all its monstrous traits, was a herbivore. Let that sink in. Those giant claws, not for hunting. That towering height, not for fighting off predators. This dinosaur, as alien and intimidating as it looked, probably used its claws to rake down tree branches. It fed on leaves, plants, maybe even ferns. In the arms race of evolution, it had the tools of a slasher film villain, but the diet of a pandadat. So what exactly was Therizinosaurus? That question would haunt scientists for decades. Imagine you're out hiking and come across a fossilized arm longer than your whole body, tipped with claws that look more like farming scythes than anything found in nature today. That's what Soviet paleontologist Evgeny Maleev faced in 1948 when he examined the remains found in the Nemegt Formation of Mongolia. He named the creature Therizinosaurus cheloniformis, which roughly translates to scythe lizard shaped like a turtle. Why a turtle? Because at the time, the clawed arms were so unlike anything seen in other dinosaurs. Maleev actually thought it might be a bizarre, long-armed turtle relative. Let's pause for a second. A long-armed turtle with sword claws? It sounds absurd. Now, but back then, without a skull or much of the body, no one could confidently say what kind of animal they were dealing with. And the claws, oh those claws, they were too outrageous to make sense. For years, Therizinosaurus remained a scientific orphan. Paleontologists couldn't fit it into any known family tree. It didn't walk the way other theropods did. It didn't eat the way herbivores usually did. It had a pot-bellied frame and huge hips but the long, stiff tail of a predator. It had feathers, but not the kind that let it fly. It was like nature had taken a few steps in one direction, then swerved wildly off course, only with the discovery of more complete relatives like Allosaurus and Bapiosaurus did the picture start to sharpen. Fossils from China revealed feathered bodies, long necks, and even impressions of downy plumage. They weren't just arms and claws anymore. They were entire animals. And they belonged to a group now called Therizinosaurus. So here's where it gets stranger. These dinosaurs, relatives of raptors and T-Rex, had evolved in the complete opposite direction. While their cousins doubled down on hunting, speed, and carnivorous power, Therizinosaurs slowed down, grew big bellies, and switched to a plant-based diet. They walked upright like giant ground sloths, had beaks for cropping vegetation, and kept their claws not as weapons, but as oversized gardening tools. Think about that for a second. Evolution took the killing tools of a predator and repurposed them for something peaceful. Terrifying claws, once meant for gripping prey, now helped pull down branches or dig into nests. It's a bit like giving Wolverine a pair of salad tongs. But even knowing all that, Therizinosaurus itself still loomed larger and stranger than its relatives. Estimates place it at over 30 feet long, the size of a small school bus. Its arms alone were over 8 feet long, making them some of the longest forelimbs relative to body size of any bipedal dinosaur. Its claws, nearly a meter each, remain the longest claws of any land animal ever discovered. Now imagine those claws slashing through the foliage of a Cretaceous forest, not in fury, but in foraging. Kind of ruins the horror movie image, doesn't it? Or maybe it doesn't, because as much as we now understand Therizinosaurus as a plant eater, there's still an eerie, uncanny quality to its appearance. It was tall and feathered, like a nightmare ostrich. It moved slowly, but deliberately. And while its claws may have been for plants, they certainly could have done damage if threatened. What predator, even a bold one, would willingly mess with something bearing weapons that big? Let's talk feathers. When the first feather impressions were found in Therizinosaurs, it rocked the paleontological world. Before then, feathers had mostly been associated with smaller, bird-like dinosaurs. But here was a massive lumbering creature, more than 5 tons in weight, covered in downy filaments. These weren't flight feathers, and they weren't decorative like a peacock's. Instead, they were likely for insulation, maybe even for display. Imagine it. A towering, pot-bellied dinosaur with shaggy feathers, an elongated neck, a beaked face, and 2 of the most nightmarish arms in natural history. It sounds like something out of a surreal dream, or a child's crayon drawing come to life. And that bizarre look may not have been an accident. There's growing evidence that Therizinosaurs, especially Therizinosaurus, used their strange appearance for communication. Some scientists suggest those massive claws may have had a dual purpose, reaching vegetation and showing off. In the animal kingdom, exaggeration is a strategy. Peacocks do it with tails. Elk do it with antlers. Therizinosaurus may have done it with claws. So, next time you see a reconstruction of this beast and think, what is that thing? That might have been the point, but that leads to a fascinating question. How did something that started out as a predator end up here? Therizinosaurs evolved from theropods, the same group that gave us Velociraptor, Allosaurus, and Tyrannosaurus Rex. For the most part, these were meat-eaters with sharp teeth, fast legs, and killer instincts. But somewhere along the evolutionary road, one branch took a different path. They slowed down. They grew broader hips and longer necks. They lost their sharp teeth and gained beaks. They didn't need to chase prey anymore. They just had to reach the leaves. It's a striking reminder of how evolution doesn't always follow a straight line. Sometimes it loops back. Sometimes it takes a hard turn. Sometimes it flips everything upside down. The idea that one of the strangest, most intimidating-looking dinosaurs of all time might have spent its days plucking ferns and nesting in the shade, that's not just weird. It's wonderful. And Therizinosaurus is the ultimate example of that unexpected trajectory. It reminds us that the story of dinosaurs isn't just about the biggest teeth or the fastest runners. It's also about the misfits, the ones that didn't fit the mold, the ones that looked like monsters, but weren't. Now let's talk defense. Yes, Therizinosaurus was an herbivore. But that doesn't mean it was helpless. Its massive claws, while primarily used for feeding, could have been devastating in a fight. One swing from those forelimbs could slash open a predator's flank. Think of them less like weapons of aggression and more like those break glass in case of emergency tools. They were there if things got ugly, and there were things to be afraid of. In the same Mongolian habitats where Therizinosaurus lived, there were large predators like Tarbosaurus, a close relative of T-Rex. These hunters were fast, powerful, and lethal. So why didn't Therizinosaurus just evolve to run? Because it chose a different path: bulk, size, intimidation. When you're 5 tons and armed with scythe hands, you don't have to run. You just have to stand your ground. In fact, some paleontologists suggest that those claws may have acted as a visual deterrent. Predators weigh risks. If something looks like it might hurt you badly, even if it's not particularly fast or agile, you might choose an easier target. So, Therizinosaurus may have used appearance as a bluff, a kind of prehistoric poker face. Sure, I'm just eating this bush, but if you come closer, you will regret it. And what about those long necks? They weren't just elegant, they were useful. Therizinosaurus could reach vegetation that shorter herbivores couldn't. It likely fed at mid to high levels, pulling down branches and stripping leaves with its beak. That long reach, combined with its massive arms, gave it access to a vertical buffet. Interestingly, its pot-bellied body suggests a large gut, ideal for fermenting tough plant material. Just like cows and other herbivores today, digestion took time, but yielded a steady flow of energy. In other words, Therizinosaurus was built not for speed, but for endurance. It didn't need to hunt. It didn't need to flee. It simply needed to feed and not get eaten. And it did both surprisingly well. Even now, Therizinosaurus remains one of the most visually baffling dinosaurs we've ever discovered. It defies expectations at every level. Predator. Lineage but vegetarian. Scythe-like claws, but not for killing. Feathers, but flightless. Huge size, but slow-moving. A dinosaur that looks like it came from a nightmare, but probably lived a peaceful, leafy life. Its discovery reshaped our understanding of what dinosaurs could be. It forced scientists to look beyond the usual predator-prey dynamics and imagine a world with stranger roles. A world where not everything that looks dangerous is dangerous. A world where evolution can get weird. And isn't that the best kind of surprise? Chapter 2. The Duck-Billed Weirdo. Syntosaurus and dinosaurs wow you with size. Others with teeth or claws. But Syntosaurus? This one turns heads for a different reason entirely. Because when its fossils were first unveiled, scientists weren't marveling at a fearsome predator or a towering giant. No, they were squinting at what looked like a horn sticking straight out of its head. A single slender, almost comical spike jutting from its forehead like a party hat, or more famously, a unicorn's horn. Yes, Syntosaurus is sometimes called the unicorn dinosaur. And while that label might sound whimsical, it actually speaks to decades of confusion, debate, and scientific head-scratching. At first, the whole idea seemed off. Was this really part of its skull? Was it some kind of mistaken fossil reconstruction? Or had scientists stumbled upon one of the strangest cranial displays in dinosaur history? Turns out, the truth is stranger than anyone imagined. The story begins in 1958, in the sandstone-rich deposits of Shandong, China. A team of paleontologists discovered the remains of a previously unknown hadrosaur, a type of duck-billed herbivore. This dinosaur was christened Syntosaurus spinohoinus, which translates roughly to Syntao lizard with a spiny nose. But that name? It wasn't just poetic. It referred directly to the odd vertical spike protruding from the middle of its skull, like someone had shoved a sword handle between its eyes. Now, duck-billed dinosaurs were already known for their weird headgear. Some, like Corythosaurus, had crests shaped like helmets. Others, like Parasaurolophus, had backward curving tubes, thought to amplify sound or aid in display. But Syntosaurus? This one went in a completely different direction. Literally, its crest pointed up. For decades, paleontologists didn't know what to make of it. Some scientists, upon examining the fossils more closely, began to doubt whether the horn was real. Was it possible this vertical spike wasn't a crest at all, but just a broken section of the nasal bone that had fused incorrectly during fossilization? Others thought it could be a displaced bone from another dinosaur altogether. After all, fossil beds are messy places. Bones shift, break, and get jumbled over millions of years. Mistakes happen. Maybe the horn didn't belong there at all. For years, Centosaurus sat in this scientific limbo, known for its peculiar head, but widely considered a reconstruction error. And then something happened. More fossils were found, better preserved, more complete, and with clearer skull material. These new discoveries confirmed what the original specimen hinted at. Centosaurus really did have a crest. But it wasn't a unicorn horn. It wasn't even solid. It was hollow. That's right. The horn-like structure was actually a tubular extension of the nasal passages, similar to other hadrosaurs, just arranged in a bizarre, vertical orientation. So the unicorn wasn't fake. It was just misunderstood. Let's take a second to appreciate how weird that is. This dinosaur had a hollow nasal crest that jutted upward like a periscope. Scientists now believe it connected to its respiratory system, meaning it could have been used for vocalization, like blowing through a long vertical flute. Can you imagine that sound? Deep, resonant honks or eerie calls echoing across late Cretaceous floodplains. These weren't just for show. They may have been vital for communication, especially in dense herds. Mating calls, warning signals, territory disputes. It's not hard to picture Centosaurus raising its head and releasing a bellowing cry through its strange, hollow horn. And that brings up a bigger point. In the late Cretaceous, visual and auditory display was everything. If you were a duck-billed dinosaur, you lived in a noisy, crowded world. Huge herds moved across ancient floodplains. Predators lurked. Mates needed impressing. Rivals needed warning. So if you could be heard from a mile away, if your headgear made you stand out in a crowd, that could mean survival. Centosaurus, with its vertical flute-like crest, may have been a Cretaceous clarinet, standing tall, sounding off, and making sure it was never ignored. But what did Centosaurus actually look like? Aside from that eye-catching crest, what kind of dinosaur was this? Well, like most hadrosaurs, the so-called duck-billed dinosaurs, Centosaurus was a plant-eating giant, built for efficiency over flash. It measured about 30 feet, 9 meters in length, and likely weighed around 3 to 4 tons. Its body was muscular but streamlined, with powerful hind legs for walking and possibly running when needed, and shorter forelimbs that could support it on all fours when grazing. Its duckbill-shaped snout helped it crop tough vegetation, and behind that bill were hundreds of closely packed teeth designed for grinding, a bit like the molars of a cow. This was a dinosaur built for chewing. And chewing. And chewing some more. In fact, hadrosaurs like Centosaurus had some of the most complex dental structures of any dinosaur. Their jaws acted like massive grinders, capable of breaking down fibrous plants with a motion similar to that of a modern herbivore. Some paleontologists even describe their tooth batteries as dental factories, rows upon rows of replacement teeth ready to go when older ones wore down. But while most hadrosaurs shared these efficient jaws, few had heads quite like this one. And that's where it gets even weirder. Further study of Centosaurus fossils has revealed something else unexpected. Its skull may not have looked exactly how we first pictured it. That vertical horn we talked about? It wasn't a solitary spike, as early reconstructions imagined. Instead, it likely rose from a more complex structure, a bony wall at the front of the face that housed this nasal crest and directed it upward. So now, instead of a unicorn, imagine something more like a dinosaur with a periscope-like protrusion rising from a ridge above its eyes. Strange, right? But it gets better. There's even speculation that soft tissue could have extended this structure further, or that the horn was brightly colored in life, used in visual displays the same way a bird might show off a vibrant beak or a flashy head plume. And in the absence of direct skin impressions, we can't rule out the possibility that the crest was part of a larger visual signal, maybe even used in species recognition. After all, when you live in herds of dozens or even hundreds of similar-looking animals, a standout headpiece might be exactly what you need to say, "Hey, I'm not that guy, I'm me." And that brings us to a fascinating detail about hadrosaurs. More generally, these weren't just the bland grazers of the dinosaur world. For a long time, people saw them as kind of boring, herbivorous, herding, not much drama. But the deeper we dig, literally, the more we uncover a world of complexity, intelligence, and bizarre adaptations. Centosaurus is a prime example. What looks silly or strange at first glance, that crest, that odd nasal structure, is actually part of a sophisticated biological system. Vocalization, visual signaling, species recognition. Even thermoregulation has been floated as a possibility for some crests, though less likely in this case. These were animals that likely communicated over long distances, that raised young in herds, that may have even had social hierarchies. So, while Centosaurus might not be as famous as a T-Rex or a Triceratops, its life was probably every bit as dynamic. Still, despite all these insights, a full picture of Centosaurus remains elusive. Because fossil records, especially in the mid-20th century when this dinosaur was first discovered, are rarely perfect. Only fragments of its skeleton have been found, mainly the skull, parts of the spine, and limb elements. Much of what we believe about its body and behavior comes from comparisons with better-known hadrosaurs. It's a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, but over time, those gaps are slowly being filled. In fact, recent advances in imaging and fossil preparation have allowed scientists to go back and re-examine original specimens, revealing details that had been missed or misinterpreted decades ago. From CT scans of skulls to microanalysis of bone texture, we're now able to peer inside fossils in ways that would have been science fiction back when Centosaurus was first unearthed. And as we do, our picture of this dinosaur and its place in the hadrosaur family gets sharper. Perhaps the most beautiful part of the Centosaurus story is what it tells us about humility in science. When early researchers thought the crest was fake, they had good reasons. The fossil was damaged. The placement looked weird. It didn't fit the pattern of other hadrosaurs. Their skepticism wasn't a mistake, it was careful thinking. But when new evidence emerged, better fossils, more complete skulls, paleontologists were willing to change their minds. To say, "We were wrong. This crest is real. And it's even stranger than we thought." That's the heart of science, isn't it? Not knowing all the answers right away, but being ready to listen when nature hands us a better one. And sometimes, those better answers turn out to be wonderfully weird. So here's where we leave Centosaurus, not as a punchline, not as a freak with a horn on its head, but as a creature uniquely adapted to its environment. A specialist in sound and display. A hadrosaur that stood tall, quite literally, above the crowd. It challenges our expectations, not just about what dinosaurs looked like, but about what we think of as normal in evolution. It reminds us that survival often favors the bold and the bizarre. And most of all, it reminds us that the more we uncover about dinosaurs, the stranger, louder, and more spectacular their world becomes. ChatGPT said. Chapter 3. The Bony-Backed Enigma. Ankylosaurus, a living tank. In the age of giants, imagine a creature so heavily armored that even the fiercest predators of the Cretaceous, yes, even Tyrannosaurus rex, might think twice before attacking. That's Ankylosaurus, one of the most heavily defended animals to ever walk the earth. Its entire back was covered in thick, bony plates embedded in the skin, forming an armored shell from head to tail. And at the very end of that tail, A massive bone club, built like a medieval weapon. But Ankylosaurus wasn't a monster. It wasn't a predator. In fact, it was a slow-moving plant-eater, content to graze on low vegetation while keeping its head down and its defenses up. It's the prehistoric version of a tank low-slung, armored, and practically impenetrable. And yet, for all its visual drama, there's so much we still don't know. How did it move? How did it live? Could it use that tail club the way we imagine? And what made this dinosaur evolve into something that looks more like a fortress than a living animal? Let's explore the mystery of Ankylosaurus, the dinosaur that may have won the evolutionary arms race, not with speed or size, but with patience, armor, and one very big club. The anatomy of defense first. Let's break down the armor. Scientists call this kind of protection osteoderms, bony deposits that form within the skin. Think of them like a built-in shield. You see something similar today in crocodiles and armadillos, but in Ankylosaurus, these osteoderms reached their evolutionary peak. The plates were arranged in rows along the back and flanks, each one shaped and positioned like tiles on a roof. Some were flat and wide. Others were raised into small spikes. Over the hips, these plates fused together into a solid pelvic shield, a nearly unbreakable barrier that protected vital organs. And on top of all that, Ankylosaurus had smaller bony nodules covering its neck, legs, and even the eyelids. Yes, you read that right. Eyelid armor. Its skull was another masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. It was broad and low, reinforced, with more bony plates that made the head nearly as armored as the back. The jaws were narrow but strong, designed for cropping vegetation close to the ground. And the nasal passages were unusually long and twisted. Some paleontologists think this helped warm and filter the air, or maybe even enhanced its sense of smell. But the real star of the show was the tail, the business end. That famous tail club at the end of Ankylosaurus's tail was a thick, fused mass of bone that could weigh over 20 pounds. This wasn't just a bony nub. It was a real weapon. The tail itself was stiffened with modified vertebrae and tendons, creating a semi-rigid lever perfect for swinging. When Ankylosaurus turned its hips and lashed out, that tail club could hit with the force of a sledgehammer. They're strong. Evidence that this club wasn't just for show. In fact, some fossils of other dinosaurs, possibly predators, have been found with injuries consistent with being struck by a heavy blunt object. Could Ankylosaurus really fend off a full-grown T-Rex with a well-placed swing? Possibly. Its low posture and rear-mounted weapon gave it a unique defensive advantage, but the tail likely wasn't just about fighting. It might have also been used in intraspecies combat fighting among Ankylosaurus individuals for territory, dominance, or mates. The same way deer clash antlers, these armored giants might have exchanged tail club blows in slow, powerful duels. A dinosaur of the late Cretaceous Ankylos lived about 68 to 66 million years ago, during the very end of the Cretaceous period. That means it walked the Earth at the same time as T-Rex, Triceratops, and other members of the famous Hell Creek Formation in North America. It was one of the last of its kind, an apex defender in a world that was about to vanish forever. Fossils of Ankylosaurus are rare. Despite being one of the most iconic armored dinosaurs, complete skeletons are hard to come by. What we know comes from a handful of skulls, pieces of armor, and partial skeletons. This scarcity makes every new fossil discovery a major event. What's especially interesting is that compared to other ankylosaurs, yes, there were several, Ankylosaurus was massive. It could grow up to 25 to 30 feet long and weigh 6 to 8 tons. That's bigger than a pickup truck, armored from head to tail. But despite its size, it likely wasn't a fast mover. Its short, stubby legs and broad body suggest a slow, deliberate gait. It was built for standing its ground, not for running away. What did it eat and how? You might expect such a heavily armored dinosaur to be a meat eater. After all, we usually associate weaponry with predators. But Ankylosaurus was a committed herbivore. Its low head and beak-like mouth were adapted for grazing on low-lying vegetation, ferns, shrubs, and flowering plants. It didn't chew in the way mammals do, but it had rows of small leaf-shaped teeth and a strong tongue to help break down its food. Interestingly, Ankylosaurus might have had a fermentation chamber in its gut, similar to modern cows or iguanas. This would have allowed it to digest tough plant material slowly, extracting as much nutrition as possible. In other words, this dinosaur may have been a walking compost machine, slow, steady, and constantly feeding, more than just a fortress. It's tempting to think of Ankylosaurus as little more than a prehistoric tank. And yes, it was slow, armored, and built for defense. But that doesn't mean it was stupid or primitive. In fact, studies of ankylosaur brains using CT scans of fossilized skulls show that they had surprisingly well-developed inner ear structures. This suggests good balance and possibly a keen sense of hearing. Its nasal passages, as mentioned earlier, were also complex, perhaps aiding in vocalization or scent detection. And let's not forget social behavior. While we don't have direct evidence of Ankylosaurus living in herds, some of its relatives did. It's possible they communicated with one another using low-frequency sounds, body postures, or even the movement of their armored tails. They may not have been flashy or fast, but they were far from boring. The mystery of the soft spots, despite its fearsome armor. Ankylosaurus wasn't invulnerable. In fact, there were soft spots, literally. The underbelly of Ankylosaurus was not protected by the same kind of armor as its back. That means a determined predator, if it could flip the animal over, might have had a shot at the kill. But doing that would have been no small feat. You'd need a lot of force, leverage, and luck. That vulnerability likely shaped the animal's behavior. Some paleontologists believe Ankylosaurus might have preferred open spaces where it could spot predators early. If it sensed danger, it could hunker down, keep its armored back exposed, and use its tail like a flail to defend itself. Its low center of gravity made it extremely hard to overturn, adding another layer of passive defense, a symbol of evolutionary ingenuity in the grand story of evolution. Ankylosaurus represents one end of a spectrum. On one side, you have speed, intelligence, and offense animals like dromaeosaurs and tyrannosaurs. On the other, you have Ankylosaurus, a creature that mastered defense so thoroughly it became a walking fortress. Its armor wasn't just physical. It was evolutionary strategy made real. Rather than run, it stood its ground. Rather than fight with claws or teeth, it let its tail do the talking. And for millions of years, that strategy worked. It survived until the very end of the age of dinosaurs, when a cosmic event, not a predator, finally ended its reign. The legacy of the armored titan today. Ankylosaurus remains one of the most recognizable dinosaurs. It shows up in museum displays, documentaries, and kids' books, often depicted as the unstoppable tank of the prehistoric world. And honestly, that's not far from the truth. But the real story is even more fascinating. It's a tale of evolutionary innovation, of bones turned to armor, of tails turned to weapons, of a creature so committed to survival that it became nearly untouchable. We may never fully understand how Ankylosaurus lived, moved, or fought. But every fossil, every bone plate, every fragment of tail tells us something incredible about the world it lived in, a world where bizarre adaptations didn't just help dinosaurs survive. They helped them thrive, and in that world, Ankylosaurus was more than just bizarre. It was brilliant. Chapter 4. The Dancer with Wings. Yiku. When scientists first laid eyes on the fossil of Yuki, they weren't quite sure what they were looking at. It had all the hallmarks of a small feathered dinosaur: lightweight bones, a long tail, claws perfect for climbing trees. But then there was the arm. Or more specifically, what was attached to the arm: a long, rod-like bone extended from the wrist. completely unlike anything seen in other dinosaurs. It wasn't part of the hand. It wasn't part of the traditional wing structure we associate with birds or other flying reptiles. And then came the most baffling part. This rod supported a membrane. A leathery, bat-like skin stretched between the fingers and the body. Suddenly, all the assumptions about dinosaur flight got tossed into the air. Yi-ki, pronounced Yi-chi, meaning strange wing in Mandarin, wasn't just another feathered dinosaur from the Jurassic. It was something entirely different, a creature that seemed to blend the features of birds, bats, and something else altogether. It didn't flap like a bird. It didn't glide like a pterosaur. It was a new kind of flyer. Or perhaps something awkwardly stuck in between. Discovered in China in 2015, Yi-ki was tiny, about the size of a pigeon, but it represented one of the most unexpected evolutionary experiments in the history of flight. For decades, paleontologists had assumed the path from ground-dwelling dinosaur to airborne bird was relatively linear. Wings evolved from arms, feathers helped with lift, and slowly, dinosaurs took to the skies. But Yi-ki threw a wrench in that tidy narrative. It wasn't just bizarre. It was revolutionary. The fossil itself came from the Taojishan Formation in Hebei province, dating back around 160 million years. It was a nearly complete skeleton, preserved in fine volcanic ash that captured even delicate traces of soft tissue. The feathers were there, yes, wispy and filamentous, probably used more for insulation than anything aerodynamic. But it was the arm structure that stole the spotlight. Unlike bird wings, which rely on long fingers and feathers to create lift, Yi-ki had evolved a different strategy. A membranous wing supported by a stiff, elongated wrist bone, much like a modern bat. This raised an immediate question. Was this convergent evolution or something entirely separate? Convergent evolution is when unrelated animals develop similar traits due to similar environmental pressures. Think of how dolphins and ichthyosaurs both developed streamlined bodies and flippers, despite one being a mammal and the other a reptile. So was Yi-ki simply copying the bat's blueprint, millions of years before bats even existed? Well, not quite. Bats evolved long after Yi-ki was gone, and they used elongated fingers to support their wing membranes. Yi-ki didn't do that. Its hands were more traditionally dinosaur-like, 3 fingers, with claws, and the strange wrist bone was a completely separate innovation. That wrist rod isn't found in any other dinosaur, bird, or flying creature. In fact, it might be one of the strangest bones in all of vertebrate evolution. And then there's the wing membrane itself. In modern animals like bats or flying squirrels, this membrane is highly elastic and stretchable, allowing them to control surface area and maneuver mid-air. Did Yi-ki have that level of control? Was it even capable of powered flight? Or was it more of a glider, leaping from tree to tree like a prehistoric sugar glider? That question remains open, and scientists are still divided. Some argue that Yi-ki was capable of some flapping flight, albeit not very efficient. It's lightweight. Bones and keeled sternum, a chest bone for muscle attachment, suggest it had strong pectoral muscles. Others believe it was more likely a glider, perhaps launching itself from high perches and coasting with help from wind currents. But no matter how it moved through the air, one thing is clear. Yi-ki represents a radically different approach to flight, one that stands apart from the lineage that eventually gave rise to modern birds. In other words, flight didn't just evolve once among dinosaurs. It may have evolved multiple times, in multiple ways, and Yi-ki is proof of that. It belonged to a group called the Scanceriopterigids, a tiny, tree-dwelling branch of Maniraptoran dinosaurs. These weren't big-time predators. They weren't hunting in packs or taking down other dinosaurs. They were small, nimble, and likely insectivorous, feeding on bugs, fruit, or small animals in the dense Jurassic forests. In that environment, It makes sense that multiple solutions to the problem of getting around could evolve. Some dinosaurs may have taken the bird route, developing strong feathers and flapping flight. Others, like Yiki, may have tried something more unconventional, a glide-first strategy, relying on membrane wings and height that raises another intriguing possibility. What if Yiki isn't an evolutionary dead end? What if it's just one of many similar species we haven't found yet? In fact, shortly after Yiki was discovered, scientists found other Scanceriopterigids with similar adaptations, like Embopteryx, another bat-winged dinosaur with the same wrist support structure. These animals may have formed a whole branch of dinosaurs that evolved flight through a completely separate mechanism than birds. That would make the Mesozoic skies a lot more crowded and a lot more interesting, instead of a simple story of pterosaurs ruling the air. Then birds slowly taking over, we now see a dynamic experimental era full of trial and error designs. Some flew with feathers, others with skin. Some flapped, others glided. And in between it all, animals like Yiki did a little of both, perhaps. Not very well, but just well enough to survive. And maybe that's the real story here. Evolution doesn't care about elegance. It doesn't aim for perfection. It just tests ideas, and the ones that work even barely get to stick around. Yiki may not have been a graceful flyer. It may not have been fast or agile or particularly efficient, but it was different. And in the forests of Jurassic China, that difference might have been exactly what it needed. From a storytelling point of view, it's hard not to root for a creature like this. It's small, strange, an evolutionary underdog. But in its wings, half dinosaur, half bat, lies a bold attempt to rewrite the rules of what it means to fly. And while its lineage may have gone extinct, its fossil remains a message from a time when nature was throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. A time when dinosaurs danced through the trees, not just on claws and feet, but on wings no one expected. Chapter 5, The Crusted Crocodile Head. Suchomimuster. S a certain image most people carry when they think of a dinosaur. Towering, upright, teeth bared, roaring as it chases terrified prey across dry land. It's dramatic and sometimes true. But every so often, we discover a dinosaur that completely appends that vision. A creature that didn't roar across deserts, but instead fished in swamps. That's Suchomimus, a bizarre predator with the face of a crocodile and the body of a theropod. It's easy to mistake Suchomimus for something other than a dinosaur at first glance. Its long, narrow snout, lined with over 100 conical teeth, looks almost exactly like that of a modern crocodile or gharial. And that's not an accident. This creature wasn't stalking herds of plant-eaters on land. It was dipping its jaw into rivers, snapping up slippery fish, and wading through shallow waters like a prehistoric fisherman. Discovered in the Sahara Desert, a place that was once a lush, river-dotted environment, Suchomimus tenerensis is one of the most complete and intriguing spinosaurids ever unearthed. And it tells a story that challenges many assumptions about how dinosaurs lived, fed, and even evolved. The name Suchomimus means crocodile mimic, and it couldn't be more fitting. Its elongated jaws were filled with straight, needle-like teeth, not the serrated, blade-like teeth of a meat-slicing predator, but the kind you see in fish eaters. Those teeth weren't designed for cutting. They were meant to grip, perfect for catching prey that wriggled and squirmed. But the mouth was just the beginning of the mystery. The skull of Suchomimus featured a low, bony crest above the eyes and nose, possibly for display or species recognition. It didn't have the towering skull structure of a T-Rex or Allosaurus. It was long and flat, clearly specialized for its unique lifestyle. The arms were massive, and that's not an exaggeration. Suchomimus had some of the longest forelimbs of any theropod, with giant claws that curved into vicious hooks. The thumb claw alone could reach over a foot in length. These weren't the shrunken vestigial arms of a tyrannosaur. These were powerful, functional limbs that may have helped the dinosaur hook fish out of water, rip into carcasses, or dig through muddy banks. Its spine was lined with tall neural spines, elongated bones extending upward from the vertebrae. These spines formed a low sail or ridge along the back, giving the animal a distinctive hump-backed appearance. Unlike the tall, exaggerated sail of Spinosaurus, Suchomimus's back ridge was more modest, but still prominent enough to spark debate. Was it used for thermoregulation, display, muscle attachment? The truth may be a mix of all three. Size-wise, Suchomimus was no small fry. It measured about 33 feet long and weighed in at over 3 tons, making it one of the larger predators of its time. But it wasn't built like a sprinter. Its long body and relatively short legs suggest a more deliberate, steady-moving lifestyle, perfect for wading through rivers and stalking prey beneath the surface. And here's the twist. Suchomimus wasn't alone. It belonged to a group of dinosaurs called Spinosaurids, a strange and specialized lineage of theropods that abandoned the traditional land predator blueprint. Instead of chasing prey on dry land, they adapted to life in and around water. Some members of this group, like Spinosaurus, may have even been fully semi-aquatic, diving and swimming like giant reptiles. This aquatic or semi-aquatic behavior is what makes Suchomimus so fascinating. It wasn't just unusual because of how it looked. It was unusual because of how it lived. For decades, dinosaurs were imagined as land-dwelling creatures, tied to dry ground and competing in terrestrial ecosystems. But Suchomimus showed us that some theropods were experimenting with entirely different strategies. In fact, if you looked at the landscape where Suchomimus lived, what's now the Sahara Desert, but was once a tropical floodplain, you'd see an entire ecosystem of strange, water-adapted predators. Giant fish like Onchopristis, massive, crocodile-like reptiles, and multiple species of Spinosaurids all coexisted in a predator-heavy environment unlike anything we see today. It was a world teeming with toothy giants, many of them competing for the same slippery prey. So how did they all manage to coexist? That question touches on a larger concept in paleontology: niche partitioning. When multiple predators share the same space, they usually evolve to specialize in slightly different ways, reducing direct competition. One might hunt in deep water, another in the shallows. One might go after large fish, another after smaller ones. Body size, skull shape, and feeding techniques can all diverge just enough to allow these animals to live side by side. Suchomimus, with its long snout and hook-like claws, likely hunted along riverbanks or in shallow streams, snatching up medium-sized fish and aquatic animals. Others, like the more aquatic Spinosaurus, may have ventured into deeper waters or even hunted larger prey. Even subtle differences in snout shape or tooth size could reflect different dietary habits. The discovery of Suchomimus was also a turning point in how paleontologists viewed the Spinosaur family. Before then, most knowledge of Spinosaurids came from isolated bones or fragmentary remains, especially from Africa and Europe. Spinosaurus, for instance, was known from a few scattered bones, many of which were destroyed in World War II, leaving scientists with more questions than answers. But Suchomimus changed that. Found in Nature by a team led by Paul Sereno in the late 1990s, it provided the first nearly complete look at a large Spinosaurid. Suddenly, researchers had a blueprint, a skeleton they could study in detail. And what they found was eye-opening. Proportions, the claws, the jaw structure, it all pointed to a dinosaur that had gone down a different evolutionary path, one that blurred the line between predator and fisher, landwalker and water-hunter. The implications went beyond Suchomimus itself. Its discovery sparked a re-evaluation of Spinosaurid fossils around the world. Bones that had been misclassified or misunderstood were now re-examined in a new light. Could that weird tooth from Brazil belong to a spinosaur? What about that strange vertebra from Morocco? The floodgates opened, and suddenly, spinosaurids were popping up everywhere, from England to Thailand to South America. But none were quite like Sickle-shaped, large, complete, and caught in the evolutionary act of becoming something different. It's worth pausing here to appreciate how strange this creature truly was. In an age dominated by sharp-toothed killers, Sickle-shaped found its niche not by overpowering prey, but by adapting to a different environment. It wasn't the fastest. It wasn't the most powerful. But it was specialized, and that made it successful. Even the idea of a water-loving theropod was revolutionary. Theropods, the group that includes everything from T-Rex to modern birds, were thought to be primarily land-based. Their body structure, metabolism, and lifestyle all seemed tailored for dry land. But Sickle-shaped broke that mold. Today, we see increasing evidence that some theropods regularly interacted with aquatic environments. From isotopic analysis of their bones, which can reveal water intake, to preserve trackways and skull morphology, the case for semi-aquatic dinosaurs grows stronger each year. And it's Sickle-shaped that opened that door wide. So what ultimately happened to this river giant? Like many dinosaurs of its time, Sickle-shaped likely fell victim to environmental changes and shifting ecosystems. Its fossils date to the early Cretaceous, around 112 million years ago. That means it lived well before the final extinction event that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs. But its disappearance reminds us that extinction isn't always sudden. Often, it's a slow decline as food sources shift, climates change, and competitors evolve. Still, for the time that was here, Sickle-shaped was a master of its environment, a creature that redefined what a dinosaur could be. It didn't need to run fast. It didn't need slicing teeth or pack tactics. All it needed was a river, a quiet approach, and jaws designed to snap shut with lightning precision. And maybe that's what makes Sickle-shaped so memorable. In the gallery of dinosaur giants, the horned, the plated, the fanged, and the feathered, this croc-faced predator stands apart. It wasn't trying to be a land tyrant. It was content to stand in the shallows, eyes on the water, waiting for something to move. And when it did, Sickle-shaped would strike, fast, efficient, and utterly unique. Chapter 6, The Moose-Headed Giant, Pachyrhinosaurus. At first glance, it looked like a triceratops that had been run through a cartoonist's filter. No horn above its nose. No proud pointed brow horns like its cousin. Instead, this dinosaur had a swollen, knobby, bony mass where its face should have ended. A moose-like lump that defied the very rules of what a horned dinosaur was supposed to be. Meet Pachyrhinosaurus, the ceratopsian that broke the mold. Its name means thick-nosed lizard, and that couldn't be more accurate. Instead of the sharp, aggressive horns you'd expect on a plant-eating dinosaur facing daily threats from predators, Pachyrhinosaurus evolved something stranger, a massive bony pad covering its face like a biological battering ram. This wasn't just a different look. It was an entirely different approach to survival, communication, and perhaps even combat. Discovered in the icy reaches of Alberta, Canada, and later in Alaska, Pachyrhinosaurus lived during the late Cretaceous, about 70 million years ago. And it wasn't just a lone oddball. It was part of a thriving community of horned dinosaurs that had adapted to some of the harshest seasonal climates known from the Mesozoic. At over 20 feet long and weighing around 4 tons, Pachyrhinosaurus was no pushover. It walked on 4 sturdy legs, with a massive body capable of plowing through thick vegetation. Its beaked mouth worked like garden shears, slicing through tough plant matter. But what truly set it apart was that face, not threatening in the traditional sense, but impossible to ignore. Where most ceratopsians brandished sharp horns, Pachyrhinosaurus carried a thickened boss of bone, a broad raised structure that sat like a knobby crown over the nose and eyes. In some individuals, this boss was surrounded by additional lumps, ridges, and small hornlets, varying wildly from specimen to specimen. Some had curved spikes, others had jagged nubs almost. Like every individual had its own face mask. This has led to one of the biggest debates in paleontology. What exactly was that facial boss for? One theory suggests that it was used in combat, but not in the way we might expect. Instead of stabbing or goring like Triceratops, Pachyrhinosaurus may have engaged in headbutting contests. Much like modern-day muskoxen or bighorn sheep, the thickened bone structure could have absorbed impact, allowing individuals to clash. Skulls and dominance displays or mating competitions. Another idea is that these bosses were for display, a bold, visual signal of identity, maturity, or social status. The variety among individuals suggests that these dinosaurs might have recognized one another based on facial patterns, just as some animals do today with antlers or feather crests. But it's not just the face that raises questions. Look behind the head, and you'll find Pachyrhinosaurus's ornate frill, a fan of bone extending backward from the skull. Like other ceratopsians, this frill was likely covered in skin and possibly used for display. In some species, it featured long spikes or wavy edges, adding to the dinosaur's dramatic silhouette. Taken together, the frill and facial boss formed a sort of prehistoric helmet, functional, decorative, and highly individualistic. And speaking of individualism, Pachyrhinosaurus has turned out to be one of the most variable dinosaurs we've ever found. Different species, like Pachyrhinosaurus canadensis and Pachyrhinosaurus lacusti, display slight but significant differences in the shape and size of their cranial features. Even within a single herd, no two skulls are exactly alike. This raises a fascinating question. Were these differences species-based, or did they reflect age, sex, or social rank? Evidence now suggests that these dinosaurs may have undergone dramatic changes in appearance as they aged. Juveniles often lacked the full boss and had more modest features, while adults sported the full suite of bumps and ridges. It's even possible that males and females look different, though the fossil record hasn't quite nailed that down. This kind of facial diversity hints at a complex social structure. These weren't mindless grazers wandering the ancient north. They were social animals, possibly living in herds, communicating visually, and forming dominance hierarchies. Imagine a group of Pachyrhinosaurus marching across a floodplain, each one looking just a bit different, each boss glinting in the sunlight, each frill edged in colorful keratin or scales dot, and yes, there's a good chance their frills and bosses were brightly colored. While we can't know the exact hues, many paleontologists believe that these display structures were used to attract mates or intimidate rivals, much like birds use colorful feathers today. Think less gray rhino, more prehistoric peacock, but as strange as its appearance was, Pachyrhinosaurus also tells a compelling story about adaptation, especially to the environment. Washington, November 8, 2024. The Federal Reserve raised the benchmark interest rate by 0.25%, marking its fourth increase this year to combat high inflation. The Fed chair stated this measure aims to control rising prices and support economic stability. Unlike the arid or tropical settings often associated with dinosaurs, Pachyrhinosaurus lived in high-latitude regions that experienced dramatic seasonal changes. During the late Cretaceous, parts of Alaska and northern Canada would have seen months of darkness in the winter and intense daylight in the summer. Temperatures may have dropped, food sources would have shifted, and snow may have blanketed the land for part of the year. Yet Pachyrhinosaurus thrived there. Fossils of entire herds have been found, including in the now famous Prince Creek Formation in northern Alaska. Some bones show signs of juvenile individuals living alongside adults, suggesting these dinosaurs may have cared for their young, or at least moved as family groups. This idea of herd living, combined with their bizarre ornamentation and possible seasonal migrations, paints a picture of a dinosaur species that was highly social and deeply adapted to its environment. They weren't the biggest dinosaurs in their ecosystem, and they weren't the most dangerous. But they had numbers, resilience, and those incredible faces, part armor, part badge of honor, part billboard. And even though they looked like bruisers, they were prey. Predators like Albertosaurus and Nanuqsaurus would have stalked Pachyrhinosaurus. Herds, picking off the young or the weak. That thick facial boss may have helped during confrontations, but it was likely no match for a full-grown Tyrannosaur's bite. Survival came down to awareness, strength in numbers, and perhaps the willingness to defend one another. Some fossils even show signs of injury, healed fractures, and deformed bone growths, indicating that Pachyrhinosaurus individuals lived. Through attacks, injuries, and inter-herd clashes, they were tough. They had to be dot in recent years. 3D reconstructions and CT scans of Pachyrhinosaurus skulls have revealed just how complex their anatomy was. Internal cavities, sinus structures, and blood vessels hint at a dynamic face, possibly with fleshy pads, thick skin, or even vascular displays that would have changed color with emotion or arousal, like a turkey's wattle or a mandrill's. Face: imagine a herd of Pachyrhinosaurus during mating season, snorting, pushing, clashing head-to-head, their frills flashing, their skin flushing with color. It's a scene that's almost impossible to prove, yet entirely plausible given what we know about display behavior in modern animals. And then there's the legacy. For decades, Triceratops held the crown as the classic horned dinosaur. But Pachyrhinosaurus has slowly clawed its way into public consciousness, thanks in part to documentaries, museum exhibits, and even a starring role in the film Walking with Dinosaurs 3D, where it was portrayed as a rugged underdog battling the harsh northern world. It's easy to see why it resonates. There's something strangely human about this dinosaur. It wasn't the fastest or flashiest. It didn't have deadly horns or a giant sail, but it had a face that told a story. A face that bore scars, quirks, and personality. A face that evolved not just for survival, but for recognition, competition, and maybe even connection. And in the end, that's what makes Pachyrhinosaurus so unforgettable. It was a creature of contradiction, gentle yet armored, ugly yet expressive, social yet capable of brutal combat. It challenges the notion that dinosaurs were all about brute force. Sometimes, evolution took a different route, one that valued display, individuality, and resilience in the cold. In a world full of sharp horns and flashing teeth, Pachyrhinosaurus stood its ground with something even more bizarre: a face built like a battering ram, and a life lived in the shadowy forests of a forgotten prehistoric North. Chapter 7. The spiked sail lizard, Amargasaurus. In the world of dinosaurs, few silhouettes are as instantly bewildering as that of Amargasaurus, a long-necked herbivore, like many of its sauropod cousins, but with something utterly alien running down its spine. Twin rows of tall, needle-like spines jutted upward from its neck and back like the quills of a mythical dragon, turning this peaceful plant eater into a walking riddle. Discovered in Argentina's Neuquén Basin, Amargasaurus was a relatively small member of the sauropod family, at least by sauropod standards, roughly 30 feet long, and likely weighing around 2 to 5 tons. That might sound massive, but when you're sharing ancestry with the titanic Argentinosaurus, it makes you the little cousin at the family reunion. Still, what Amargasaurus lacked in size, it more than made up for in style, running down its neck. And along the first part of its back were elongated neural spines, bones that extended upward from its vertebrae, some reaching lengths of nearly 2 feet. But unlike the single row of sail-like spines seen in dinosaurs like Spinosaurus, Amargasaurus had a double row. 2 parallel lines of curved, tapering spines that likely supported something dramatic. But what exactly? That question has been haunting paleontologists for decades. At first glance, you might assume these spines supported a sail, something like a giant fin or flap of skin stretching between them. A back sail could have served many purposes: thermoregulation, species recognition, or even display during mating season. It's a fair guess, considering other dinosaurs and prehistoric creatures have been interpreted to carry similar structures. But there's a catch. The spines on Amargasaurus were long and narrow, yes, but they were also tightly packed. So tightly, in fact, that there may not have been enough space between them to stretch a skin sail in the traditional sense. In some reconstructions, the spines flare apart like a fan. In others, they sit close together like a cluster of skeletal fingers. Alternative theory suggests these spines weren't connected by skin at all, but stood individually, more like quills. Think of a porcupine or a hedgehog. Of course, Amargasaurus wasn't bristling with sharp keratin spikes like modern mammals, but the idea is similar. The spines could have been encased in a horny sheath or left exposed, creating a line of intimidating projections down its back. This raises another possibility. Were those spines weapons? Could Amargasaurus have used its spiny neck defensively, perhaps swiping at predators or making itself harder to bite? It sounds strange, but nature already offers modern analogs. Consider the African crested porcupine, which rattles and lashes its quills to fend off lions. Or the extinct Sisygosaurus, which wielded a thagomizer, a spiked tail that was once thought ornamental, but now known to have been used for defense. If predators like Allosaurus or Maposaurus got too close, the tall spines of Amargasaurus might have made its neck a difficult, dangerous target. One wrong move, and a mouthful of bone splinters could have been the result. But the defensive theory isn't the only, or even the most likely interpretation. More and more paleontologists are leaning toward the idea that the spines were part of a visual display system. In other words, they were a way to say, "Look at me." In the world of dinosaurs, display structures are everywhere. Crests, sails, horns, frills. Evolution clearly favored visual signaling. It's possible that the spines of Amargasaurus were brightly colored or used in elaborate mating dances, or simply made the dinosaur more recognizable to its own kind. And here's where things get even more intriguing. Fossils of Amargasaurus are extremely rare. In fact, we only have one reasonably complete specimen, discovered in the early 1990s. Yet from that one find, a rich story has emerged, not just about the animal itself, but about the strange corner of South America it inhabited during the 5e. Early Cretaceous, roughly 125 million years ago. At that time, South America was still part of the southern supercontinent Gondwana. The climate was warm, the landscapes varied, floodplains, forests, volcanic zones, and the ecosystem was packed with other unusual dinosaurs. Amargasaurus lived alongside theropods like Carnotaurus, and perhaps even early abelisaurids with short faces and stunted arms. Unlike many sauropods that lived in wide, open spaces, Amargasaurus may have inhabited more wooded environments. Its smaller size would have been an advantage here, helping it maneuver through dense vegetation. Its long neck, topped with those towering spines, might have made it visible even when partially hidden among trees, a possible advantage for herd coordination or mate attraction. And that long neck is worth talking about. Sauropods were the masters of the neck game, evolving them for reaching high foliage or scanning their surroundings. But with a neck like Amargasaurus's, essentially armored with twin rows of bone, mobility might have been somewhat limited. Could it still swing that neck around to reach food? Probably. But it may have had to use more of its body to reposition itself. Still, even with this peculiar anatomy, Amargasaurus was well adapted for its niche. Its teeth were shaped for stripping leaves, and its skeletal structure shows evidence of strong muscle attachments, ideal for supporting the weight of its spines and navigating a complex landscape. One question that continues to haunt researchers is why only Amargasaurus, and no other known sauropod, evolved this spine configuration. Why? Didn't more sauropods grow sails or quills? Why was this evolutionary experiment apparently so short-lived? Perhaps it was a localized adaptation, one that worked for a specific environment or served a particular purpose within a confined region. Or maybe we just haven't found the other dinosaurs like it. There's also the possibility that the spines carried multiple functions, a combination of display, thermoregulation, and defense. Evolution doesn't always draw clean lines. In nature, structures often serve overlapping roles. A feature that starts as one thing can evolve into something else entirely. Even the position of the spines, starting at the neck and thinning out toward the back, may suggest an evolutionary origin in display, gradually reducing in prominence as they became less useful further down the spine. Or perhaps it was about balance, a tall neck display that didn't overly strain the lower body. Another curious idea, though speculative, is that the spines could have played a role in sound production. Could a Margosaurus have used them to vibrate or resonate, perhaps as part of a low-frequency communication system? Some paleontologists have floated this possibility, drawing loose comparisons with the ridged backs of some modern reptiles or the vocal sacs of amphibians. Though the evidence is scant, it's another layer of mystery surrounding this already enigmatic dinosaur. We may never know the full truth of what those spines meant. But what a Margosaurus gives us is a glimpse into the weird and wondrous paths evolution can take. Here was a dinosaur that didn't need brute force or colossal size to stand out. It didn't rely on horns or frills or claws. Instead, it evolved a set of back spines so striking, so theatrical, that it has captured the imagination of scientists and artists alike. In Paleoart, a Margosaurus is a favorite subject. Depicted with rainbow-colored sails or sharp, obsidian-like spines, it represents something rare, a creature that straddles the line between reality and fantasy. You almost have to remind yourself that it actually existed. This wasn't the invention of a science fiction illustrator. This was a real animal that lived, breathed, and possibly flashed its spines under the sun of prehistoric Argentina. And in that way, a Margosaurus is more than just a bizarre dinosaur. It's a symbol of the unpredictable creativity of life. A reminder that sometimes the most effective way to survive isn't to be the biggest or the strongest. It's to be the most unexpected. Chapter 8. The Predator with a Paddle Tail. Herbivore. You think of a raptor, certain images probably spring to mind. A nimble land-stalking predator with razor-sharp claws, keen eyesight, and a hunger for the hunt. Something like Velociraptor, right? Fast, agile, and very much at home on dry land. But what if I told you that one raptor decided to rewrite that script entirely, trading sprinting for swimming, claws for paddles, and desert hunting for underwater ambushes? Meet Velociraptor, one of the strangest, most confounding dinosaurs ever discovered. A predator that looked like it was made from leftover parts of several animals, yet somehow worked as a coherent, living creature. Discovered in Mongolia and named in 2017, Velociraptor scaly immediately stunned paleontologists. For starters, its skeleton was beautifully preserved, allowing for close inspection. But what made jaws drop was what that inspection revealed: a theropod that didn't play by the usual rules. At first glance, Velociraptor looked like a typical small raptor. It had a long, slender body, feathers, and a skull that vaguely echoed its cousins. But then came the weirdness. The more they looked, the more it resembled something else entirely. Its skull was long and flattened, like that of a goose or a crocodile. Its snout was lined with tiny, sharp teeth and had rows of sensory pits along the edge, not unlike those found in modern aquatic hunters like crocodiles, which use them to detect movement in the water. The neck? Incredibly long and flexible, almost swan-like. The arms? Short, but strong and unusually shaped, with features suggesting they weren't meant for flight, but for paddling. And the tail? rigid and paddle-shaped, possibly acting like a rudder. When this strange little dinosaur dove underwater, what paleontologists realized was that Holscaraptor was no ordinary land predator. It was a semi-aquatic dinosaur, the first of its kind. In a world where most raptors were racing across plains or darting through forests, Holscaraptor was slicing through lakes and streams like a feathered otter. Let's pause here and let that sink in. A swimming raptor. It completely shattered our mental image of what theropods were capable of. This wasn't some marine reptile like an ichthyosaur or plesiosaur. This was a dinosaur, feathered, bipedal, and descended from the same lineage that gave rise to birds, that had found a niche in the water. Just how aquatic was it? That's still a matter of debate. It probably didn't spend its entire life submerged like a penguin or seal, but it seems clear that water played a major role in its hunting strategy. Imagine it stalking the shorelines of ancient lakes or rivers, slipping silently beneath the surface, then launching an attack with its long neck and snapping jaws. Its curved, sickle-like toe claws, so iconic among raptors, may not have been used for slashing prey in high-speed chases, but instead for anchoring itself to slippery terrain or grabbing at fish and amphibians. It was a specialist, but not in the way most dinosaurs are. It didn't grow massive size or extreme armor. It didn't have massive teeth or crushing jaws. What it had was adaptability and an ecological imagination. To appreciate how revolutionary this find was, we have to understand how conservative dinosaur paleontology has been about ecosystems. For decades, dinosaurs were considered strictly terrestrial animals. If you wanted something swimming, you'd look to marine reptiles. Dinosaurs didn't do water, at least not as a lifestyle. But Holscaraptor shattered that wall. It proved that at least some small theropods had crossed over into aquatic hunting. This discovery rippled through paleontology. It begged new questions. Were there other semi-aquatic dinosaurs we've missed? Could some fossilized features we've written off as weird actually be aquatic adaptations? How many times might evolution have nudged dinosaurs toward the water, and how many times did we miss it? There's also the matter of how Holscaraptor fits into the larger dinosaur family tree. It was part of the Dromaeosaurid group, the same that gave us Velociraptor, Deinonychus, and Utahraptor. But Holscaraptor belonged to a more basal lineage, one that seems to have branched off early and gone its own way. Its features hint at a long evolutionary journey away from its land-hunting cousins. And then there's the question of feathers. Yes, Holscaraptor was likely feathered, not for flight, but perhaps for insulation. Water robs animals of body heat faster than air does, and feathers may have helped it regulate its temperature. But could those feathers have also helped in swimming, like the waterproof plumage of ducks or penguins? We don't know for sure, but it's not out of the question. Even more fascinating is how Holscaraptor was preserved. The fossil was part of a private collection, held illegally for years, before finally making its way to researchers. There were initial concerns it might be a forgery because the anatomy was just so bizarre. It almost looked like someone had glued a raptor's body to a bird's neck and a crocodile's head. But advanced imaging techniques, including synchrotron scans, confirmed that the fossil was authentic, a real animal, not a hoax. So not only was Holscaraptor a biological oddity, but its journey into science was equally strange. A dinosaur, lost to the black market, almost dismissed as fake, now sits at the center of one of the most exciting shifts in how we view dinosaur diversity. It's a reminder of how much we still don't know. Paleontology is often shaped by absence. We fill in the blanks between bones with inference and comparison. But every now and then, something like Holscaraptor comes along and throws all of that into disarray. It tells us that evolution doesn't always take the predictable path. That sometimes, predators don't grow bigger teeth or faster legs. They learn to swim. And in doing so, Holscaraptor opens up a world of possibilities. What else might be hiding in the fossil record? waiting to show us a different way to be a dinosaur. Were there other raptors that dabbled in water? Could some of the strange limb proportions we've seen in other small theropods be early aquatic adaptations we failed to recognize? Even today, many of the world's predators exploit water in creative ways. Big cats will swim when needed. Bears hunt salmon in rivers. Birds dive like missiles into lakes. Why should dinosaurs have been any less inventive? In Velociraptor, we get a glimpse of that inventiveness. A dinosaur that didn't settle for the role nature seemed to cast it in. Instead, it took a different stage, the shallows of a Cretaceous waterway, and became something else entirely. It's hard not to be inspired by that. Chapter 9. The Beaked Blade Fighter. Lemursaurus. Most people imagine theropods, the group of dinosaurs that includes T-Rex and Velociraptor, as relentless carnivores. Teeth like steak knives, jaws like bear traps, claws primed to slice. But what happens when a theropod decides to drop its teeth, pick up a beak, and give up meat altogether? It sounds like a bizarre evolutionary U-turn, but that's exactly what happened with Lemursaurus, one of the strangest, most transformative dinosaurs ever discovered. At first glance, Lemursaurus inextricabilis doesn't look especially outlandish. It was small, roughly 5 to 6 feet long from snout to tail, with a long neck, powerful hind legs, and a relatively slender frame. It lived in what is now western China during the late Jurassic, around 160 million years ago. But dig deeper into its anatomy and its growth, and the weirdness begins to emerge. This was a theropod with a beak and no teeth. At least not in adulthood. And that's where the mystery starts. When juvenile specimens of Lemursaurus were first unearthed, scientists were intrigued by their mouths. They had rows of small teeth, just as expected for a typical meat-eating theropod. But as paleontologists collected more specimens of different ages, a bizarre pattern began to emerge. As the dinosaurs grew older, their teeth didn't just change. They disappeared entirely. Adult Lemursaurus had no teeth at all. None. Instead, their mouths were capped with a hard, bird-like beak. That alone was strange, but the transition from toothed to toothless during their lifespan was unprecedented in any known dinosaur. It was a discovery that stunned the scientific world. This ontogenetic tooth loss, the process of losing teeth as part of aging, had never been seen in a non-avian dinosaur. In modern animals, it's mostly observed in species like birds and some turtles. But a theropod? A member of the group famous for their carnivorous legacy? It was a curveball few saw coming. So why would Lemursaurus lose its teeth as it matured? The leading theory is dietary shift. Juveniles, with their small teeth, may have fed on insects, small prey, or omnivorous fare. But as they grew, their bodies and mouths adapted to a plant-based lifestyle. Adults appear to have relied heavily on vegetation, using their beaks to nip at soft plants and possibly even seeds. Their gut contents suggest a digestive system more in line with herbivores than carnivores. They didn't just look different, they lived differently too. That's a profound statement on dinosaur ecology. It means Lemursaurus wasn't locked into one role throughout its life. It started off as a predator omnivore and grew into an herbivore. In a world full of niche specialization, this kind of dramatic dietary pivot is rare and remarkable. But the strangeness of Lemursaurus doesn't end with its beak. Take a look at its arms. For a theropod, you'd expect 3 fingers. It's one of the hallmarks of the group. In many theropods, those fingers were armed with claws and used for grasping or slashing. But in Lemursaurus, something unusual had happened. It had only 2 functional fingers. The third was reduced to a tiny, splint-like bone. It wasn't quite like the hand of modern birds, but it was getting there. This reduction in fingers is a crucial clue in understanding how bird wings evolved from dinosaur hands. In fact, Lemursaurus is often considered a key piece of evidence in the debate over which digits were retained in the Transition from dinosaurs to birds. If the bird-hen puzzle had 3 pieces, let's say digits 1, 2, and 3, Limosaurus seems to have held on to only the first 2, suggesting a possible model for how the avian wing could have developed from earlier dinosaur hands. It's like a missing link, bridging 2 anatomical worlds. So now we have a dinosaur that starts life as a toothed carnivore, matures into a beaked herbivore, and walks around with 2-fingered arms that hint at bird-like evolution. What else could Limosaurus possibly do to surprise us? How about its name, Limosaurus inextricabilis, which roughly translates to mud lizard who cannot escape? It was given that name because multiple fossils were found trapped together in ancient mud pits, preserved in remarkable condition. These quagmires acted like natural time capsules, catching unfortunate dinosaurs in sticky death traps and leaving behind detailed fossil records. The exceptional preservation of Limosaurus fossils means we know more about this small dinosaur than many others its size. From hatchling to adult, scientists have uncovered a rare growth series that allows them to chart not just its anatomy, but its entire developmental arc. That kind of fossil evidence is rare. Most of the time, paleontologists are stuck with fragments. A hip here, a jaw there, maybe a tooth. But with Limosaurus we see the full story, how it hatched, how it grew, how it changed its behavior, its appearance, and even its role in the ecosystem. There's also the broader implication for theropod evolution. Limosaurus shows that not all theropods stayed carnivorous. While birds are the most famous example of theropods evolving plant-based diets, Limosaurus shows that even earlier in dinosaur history, the groundwork was being laid for that transition. It suggests that dietary flexibility may have been more common than previously thought, and it pushes us to rethink what we expect from dinosaurs. For decades, we painted them in broad strokes: meat-eaters and plant-eaters, predators and prey, divided along clear lines. But nature doesn't work that way. Evolution is messy. It tries out weird experiments. Some fail. Others survive just long enough to be captured in stone, waiting for us to find them. Limosaurus was one of those experiments. Its life was marked by transformation. From toothy hatchling to toothless adult, from meat-eater to plant nibbler, from 3-fingered hunter to 2-fingered forager. It was a dinosaur in flux, and that's what makes it extraordinary. It also forces us to reconsider how we reconstruct the behaviors of extinct animals. If you only had the adult form of Limosaurus, you'd assume it had always been toothless. You might even question whether it was a theropod at all. But thanks to the full fossil record, we see the truth. It didn't just defy expectations. It evolved across its own lifetime. Even today, modern animals rarely show such dramatic shifts in lifestyle. Some amphibians, like frogs, start as herbivorous tadpoles and become insectivores as adults. But this kind of metamorphosis is the exception, not the rule. In vertebrates, it's rare to see such clear examples of ontogenetic niche shifts, where juveniles and adults live very differently. And in the dinosaur world, Limosaurus stands alone. What it leaves us with is a deeper, richer view of dinosaur life, not as static creatures locked into a single role, but as dynamic animals whose lives were shaped by time, growth, and change. Dinosaurs weren't just giant lizards. They were complex, adaptable beings. Some fought with teeth, others evolved beaks. Some flew, others swam. And in the case of Limosaurus, some changed their entire way of life with age. It is, in every sense, a dinosaur that reinvented itself. And in doing so, it helps us reinvent our understanding of dinosaurs altogether. ChatGPT said, Chapter 10. The dinosaur that peaked too soon. There's something undeniably fascinating about dome-headed dinosaurs. With skulls that looked like living helmets and spikes protruding like a medieval weapon, they've long captured the imagination of both scientists and the public. And among these so-called boneheads, none stirred up as much confusion or controversy as Stygimoloch. For decades, Stygimoloch spinifer was presented in museums and books as its own bizarre species, a medium-sized bipedal dinosaur, with a thick, spiky dome on its head that looked tailor-made for headbutting. Its name, inspired by Styx, the mythical river to the underworld, loosely means demon from the river of death. A fittingly dramatic title for a dinosaur that looked like it. Could have stepped out of a fantasy novel. But here's the twist. Stygimoloch might not have been a real species at all. At least not in the way we originally thought. Let's go back to what made Stygimoloch so strange in the first place. It belonged to a group of dinosaurs called pachycephalosaurs, literally thick-headed lizards known for their massively domed skulls. These creatures walked on two legs, had relatively short arms, and carried long tails for balance. Most were plant eaters, and they lived during the late Cretaceous, sharing the planet with giants like T-Rex and Triceratops. But where Stygimoloch stood out was in its skull. Unlike other pachycephalosaurs with smooth, rounded domes, this one had something extra: long, backward-sweeping spikes, some as long as 5 inches. Combine that with the dome, and you get a dinosaur head that looked more like a mace than a skull. Naturally, this led to wild speculation about what the spikes were for. Defense, mating display, social rank, or perhaps, and most famously, for ramming. Like modern-day bighorn sheep or musk oxen, many believed pachycephalosaurs used their thick skulls in combat, slamming into each other in head-to-head battles for dominance. The visual was irresistible. Two dinosaurs, charging at each other like gladiators, their domes crashing with a sound like thunder. That was the prevailing image for years, but as paleontologists dug deeper and technology improved, that story started to unravel. First, CT scans of pachycephalosaur skulls revealed that their domes might not have been ideal for headbutting after all. The bone structure was more complex and varied than originally thought. Some skulls had hollow spaces, others had bone that looked more spongy than solid. These weren't the steel-hard helmets once imagined. Then came the game-changing discovery. The idea that Stygimoloch might not be a separate species at all, but instead a teenager, specifically a teenage Pachycephalosaurus. This theory rocked the paleontology world. It suggested that what had been classified as different species, Dracorex, Stygimoloch, and Pachycephalosaurus, were actually the same animal at different growth stages. Here's how it breaks down. Dracorex hugwartsia, with its flat skull and lots of ornamental spikes, might be the juvenile form. Stygimoloch, with a smaller dome and longer horns, could represent a subadult, a kind of awkward teenage phase. And Pachycephalosaurus wyomingsis, with its massive, fully developed dome and reduced spikes, would be the full-grown adult. If that's true, and mounting evidence suggests it is, then Stygimoloch wasn't a fully distinct species at all. It was a passing phase, a moment in time. A rebellious, spiky-headed teenager that would eventually grow up, smooth out, and become something very different. Think of it like this. What if you named an entirely new species based on a teenager, not realizing it would change dramatically by adulthood? That's essentially what happened here. Paleontology doesn't always have the luxury of watching dinosaurs grow up. We find fossils frozen at random stages of life, and it's easy to mistake growth for diversity. This revelation has profound implications. It means the variety we thought existed among dome-headed dinosaurs may have been exaggerated. It also reminds us that dinosaur development, like that of modern animals, could be dramatic and complex. Horns could shrink, domes could grow, spikes could vanish, and it raises questions about behavior too. If those spikes and domes changed with age, were they really for combat? Or were they display features, like antlers on a deer, used for attracting mates or intimidating rivals? Some scientists now believe the dome might have been more about visual communication than brute force. Bright coloration, posture, and even subtle movements could have played a role. Maybe they didn't charge head-on after all. Maybe they bluffed. Maybe they paraded around in ritualistic displays, showing off their weird heads the way birds today puff up feathers or flash colorful crests. But don't count out the combat theory just yet. Some Pachycephalosaurus skulls do show signs of injury. Lesions, fractures, healed dents. This suggests that some form of physical contest did occur. Whether it was head-to-head, flank butting, or some other kind of contact, the bone tells a story of occasional violence. Perhaps young males sparred like adolescent deer, learning their place before growing into the less aggressive adults. Which brings us back to Stygimoloch. If it was indeed a teenage version of Pachycephalosaurus, that makes it a rare and valuable window into how dinosaurs grew. It's a snapshot of awkward transition, like finding a fossil of a caterpillar halfway through becoming a butterfly. These transitional forms are gold for paleontologists because they show evolution in motion, not just the start or end result. It also highlights just how fluid our understanding of dinosaurs still is, even now. New discoveries are reshaping species we thought we knew. Manes change. Family trees are redrawn. Behaviors once assumed are now questioned. The fossil record doesn't lie, but it often tells a story more complicated than we expect, and Stygimoloch is a prime example. So, did it really exist? That depends on how you define existence. If you're asking whether a dinosaur with a spiky dome-headed skull once walked the earth, absolutely, yes. If you're asking whether it was a standalone species called Stygimoloch, probably not. But it was real. It lived, it grew, and it left behind clues. What's perhaps most captivating about Stygimoloch is that it forces us to think about identity, not just in terms of species, but in terms of time. It's the idea that a creature can be something completely different at different stages of life. That childhood, adolescence, and adulthood can all look like different animals. In that way, Stygimoloch didn't just peak too soon. It became a symbol for how change, both biological and scientific, is constant. And if we've learned anything from this misunderstood dinosaur, it's that no matter how spiky, strange, or short-lived a stage may be, it's still worth remembering. ChatGPT said, Chapter 11, The One-Fingered Oddity, Mononychus. Imagine a dinosaur no bigger than a turkey, covered in feathers, running across a late Cretaceous desert on skinny legs, stopping every so often to jab its stubby arms into a termite mound. Sounds more like a bird than a dinosaur, right? But this wasn't any bird. This was Mononychus, one of the strangest little creatures to ever walk the earth, and one of the most misunderstood. When Mononychus olecrinus was first discovered in Mongolia in the early 1990s, paleontologists weren't quite sure what to make of it. Here was a theropod dinosaur, the group that includes T-Rex and modern birds. But this one looked like it had been designed by a minimalist. Its arms were comically short. Its entire hand was reduced to a single large claw. And unlike the terrifying meat-eaters it was related to, Mononychus seemed almost harmless. But don't let its size fool you. This one-fingered dinosaur may not have been a predator in the traditional sense, but it was built with purpose. That lone, strong claw, it wasn't useless. It was a specialized tool, like a carpenter's chisel or an anteater's snout. Let's start with the body. Mononychus was lightweight and fast. Its legs were long and powerful, clearly built for sprinting across open landscapes. It had a long tail for balance, small teeth, and a narrow snout. And then there were the arms, short, muscular, ending in a single digit tipped with a large, curved claw. This body plan wasn't about brute strength. It was about precision. For years, scientists debated what this dinosaur was actually doing with its strange anatomy. Some early theories were wildly off base. One idea even suggested it was aquatic, using its stubby arms like flippers. But, over time, and with better fossil evidence, a clearer picture began to emerge. The answer may lie in modern analogs. If we look at today's animals, the creature Monanicus most resembles isn't another dinosaur, it's the anteater or pangolin. These mammals also have short, powerful forelimbs with strong claws. And they use them for one thing: breaking into insect nests. That led to a compelling theory. Maybe Monanicus was an insectivore, a specialist feeder that used its claw to rip open termite mounds or ant colonies, then used its long, slender tongue to slurp up the bugs inside. Its narrow snout and reduced teeth support this idea, as is the structure of its arm, which shows adaptations for powerful, focused movement, not grasping or slashing. This behavior would make Monanicus a kind of Dinosaurian echidna, a small, fast, bug-hunting creature that lived in dry environments and made a living doing what no other dinosaur could. And that raises another point: specialization. Dinosaurs are often portrayed as big, lumbering generalists eating whatever was available, living wherever they could. But Monanicus challenges that view. It was specialized, adapted for a very specific ecological niche. It wasn't hunting other dinosaurs. It wasn't grazing on ferns. It was poking holes in dirt mounds and sucking up insects. That kind of ecological precision shows a level of evolutionary refinement we don't often associate with dinosaurs. And it wasn't alone. Monanicus was part of a group called Alvarezars, a weird, diverse lineage of feathered theropods that shared similar features: small size, reduced hands, long legs, and sometimes just one functioning finger. For a long time, these dinosaurs were hard to place in the family tree. Were they birds? Bird relatives? Some strange offshoot of coelurosaurs? Eventually, they were recognized as their own branch of the dinosaur family, one that split off from other theropods and followed a unique evolutionary path. And while they never got huge or famous, they show that even in the age of giants, small specialists had a role to play. What's particularly intriguing about Monanicus is how it blurs the line between dinosaur and bird. It had feathers, likely, a full coat of them. It had a keeled sternum, like modern birds, to anchor powerful flight muscles. Even though it couldn't fly, it had a bird-like pelvis and a bird-like brain case. Yet it walked on the ground, didn't have wings in the traditional sense, and used its arms for digging instead of flying. In other words, it looked like a bird but behaved like something else entirely. This convergence, looking bird-like without being a bird, makes Monanicus a crucial piece in understanding avian evolution. It shows us that feathers didn't evolve solely for flight. They may have had multiple functions: insulation, display, perhaps even sensory use. And in creatures like Monanicus, we see the many experiments evolution was running before birds truly took off. Another reason Monanicus is so fascinating: its anatomy breaks expectations. Most theropods had 3 fingers. Some lost 1. T-Rex, for example, had 2. But Monanicus took reduction to the extreme: 1 functional finger. That's almost unheard of in the dinosaur world. Evolution doesn't usually gamble on reducing limbs unless there's a payoff. In this case, it seems the payoff was a claw. That could exert high force in a compact space, perfect for busting into hardened dirt or wood. But why would evolution favor that? Because nature always fills a void. Insects were abundant in the late Cretaceous. Termites were widespread, especially in arid environments. While mammals were still small and mostly nocturnal, a niche existed for a small, fast daytime hunter that could crack into nests and grab an easy meal. Monanicus fit that job description perfectly. It didn't need to be big. It didn't need to be scary. It just needed to be efficient. And efficiency is exactly what its body shows. You might ask, if Monanicus was so successful, Why don't we hear more about it? Part of the reason is fossil rarity. Alvarezars are notoriously hard to find. Their bones are small and fragile, easily destroyed or overlooked. Many early finds were fragmentary, making it hard to connect the dots. It wasn't until the discovery of more complete specimens in the Gobi Desert that paleontologists really began to piece together what these animals looked like. Even then, their weirdness made them controversial. For years, Manuka's fossils were debated hotly, especially regarding its place in the bird-dinosaur continuum. Some scientists argued it was closer to modern birds than many other theropods. Others said it was simply another branch of feathered dinosaurs experimenting with strange anatomy. But today, there's a general consensus. Mononychus and its kin were their own strange subgroup of Maniraptoran theropods, close relatives to birds, but not birds themselves. That, in itself, is remarkable, because what Mononychus teaches us is that evolution isn't linear. It doesn't go from dinosaur to bird in a straight line. It branches, it experiments, it backtracks. Some creatures evolve feathers and fly. Others evolve feathers and dig. Some reduce their fingers. Others keep them. It's messy. And that's what makes it beautiful. Mononychus reminds us that not all dinosaurs were about dominance or brute force. Some thrived through adaptation, finesse, and specialization. They weren't all massive. They weren't all terrifying. Some, like this one-fingered oddball, made their mark by finding a quiet corner of the ecosystem and mastering it. And in doing so, they left behind a mystery that still challenges how we think about dinosaurs. They weren't just ancient reptiles stomping through ferns. They were clever, dynamic creatures, solving problems, adapting to their world, and sometimes digging in the dirt for ants. Chapter 12. The herbivore with a hook. Nigersaurus at first glance. Nigersaurus looks like a joke. A dinosaur with a face so flat it seems cartoonish, teeth arranged in a straight line like a vacuum cleaner brush, and a skull so light it could practically float. But don't laugh just yet, because Nigersaurus wasn't a mistake of nature. It was an evolutionary specialist, a grazing machine designed for a very specific way of life, discovered in the Republic of Niger in the Sahara Desert. Nigersaurus tecoides is one of the most bizarre sauropods ever found. And that's saying something, considering this group includes giants with sails, clubs, and even armor. But Nigersaurus didn't rely on size or strength to stand out. Instead, it did something far stranger. It re-engineered its entire skull to become a horizontal lawnmower. Let's start with the head. Most sauropods, the long-necked, long-tailed dinosaurs, had small heads with peg-like teeth located toward the front of the jaw, not Nigersaurus. Its head was short, squarish, and incredibly light. Its jaw was wide, almost like a duck's bill, and its teeth were placed all the way at the front in a perfectly straight row. In fact, it had over 500 teeth, not all visible at once, but arranged in rows that replaced themselves rapidly, like a conveyor belt. When one wore out, another moved into place. This setup was ideal for a particular task, grazing very low vegetation. Now, you might be thinking, wait, sauropods were tall. Didn't they eat from the tops of trees? That's the classic image, but it turns out, not all of them fed that way. Some, like Nigersaurus, were low browsers. In fact, biomechanical studies suggest it kept its head held down most of the time, with its snout close to the ground. This was a dinosaur that vacuumed up ferns, horsetails, and other soft-ground plants like a living ROOMBA. And that raises one of the most fascinating aspects of Nigersaurus, its neck posture. Paleontologists used CT scans and 3D modeling to study the inner ear and vertebrae of Nigersaurus, allowing them to estimate the habitual angle of the head. The result? Its skull was almost always pointed downward. That odd, flat face wasn't some deformity. It was perfectly adapted for ground level grazing. while others stretched for leaves above. Negersaurus scoured the earth for greens. It's like evolution was playing with contrast. What if we take a sauropod, but flip the script? Even the bones of Nigersaurus add to its mystery. Its skull is so lightweight and full of openings that it's sometimes compared to paper, thin, delicate, almost fragile. Yet somehow it supported a complex feeding system with numerous teeth, muscles, and nerves. Nature, as usual, found the balance between strength and weight. This extreme lightness would have helped the animal keep its head down for long periods without tiring. Its body followed the typical sauropod layout: long neck, stocky body, thick legs, and a long tail. But it wasn't a giant like Argentinosaurus or Brachiosaurus. It was modest by sauropod standards, around 30 feet long, maybe weighing 4 tons. Still big, but not massive. It didn't need to be. Its strategy wasn't intimidation or reach. It was efficiency. And that's where the teeth come back in. Most herbivorous dinosaurs had teeth adapted to shear, clip, or strip vegetation. Nigersaurus, on the other hand, had teeth shaped like columns, ideal for slicing soft plant matter. But more importantly, those teeth wore down fast. That's where the hundreds of backup teeth came in. It's estimated that Nigersaurus replaced its teeth every 14 days. That's astonishing, one of the fastest tooth replacement rates in the entire dinosaur record. Imagine needing new teeth twice a month. That gives you an idea of how much wear and tear Negersaurus dealt with while feeding. Its wide muzzle and front-loaded teeth also meant it could cover a large feeding area with minimal movement. Head down, neck sweeping slowly from side to side. It could graze for hours without lifting a foot. That's the kind of energy-efficient behavior that allows herbivores to thrive, low effort, high return. Now, let's talk about the environment. During the mid-Cretaceous, around 110 million years ago, the region that's now Niger wasn't a desert. It was a lush floodplain with rivers, forests, and sprawling vegetation. It was home to a strange mix of dinosaurs, including predators like Cyclomimus, fellow sauropods like Ouranosaurus, and ancient crocodile relatives. In this ecosystem, Nigersaurus found its niche, while other herbivores foraged at higher levels or moved through different terrain. It stuck to the ground cover, scooping up ferns, cycads, and perhaps even aquatic plants near riverbanks. Its entire anatomy was built around this feeding style. What's fascinating is how such a specialized creature remained hidden from the public eye for so long. Though bones were first uncovered in the 1970s, it wasn't until the 1990s and early 2000s that scientists pieced together a more complete skeleton. And even then, many paleontologists had trouble believing the reconstructions. Some thought the head must be wrong, a sauropod with a sideways mouth. It just seemed absurd, but the fossils didn't lie. And once CT scans and computer modeling confirmed the placement of the jaws and teeth, the full picture came into focus. This was no error. It was just a design so strange that no one saw it coming. Even the name has an air of elegance. Nigersaurus. Tequeti, named both for the country of Niger and for French paleontologist Philippe Tequet, who made key discoveries in the region. It reminds us how much of paleontology is tied to the places and people who uncover these ancient stories. There's also something charming about Nigersaurus. In a world filled with terrifying predators and towering titans, here was a dinosaur that quietly did its job, grazing, moving slowly, keeping its head down. It didn't need horns or claws. It didn't need to roar or charge. It was a gentle, specialized feeder. And that gentleness is part of what makes it so compelling. In fact, it's become something of a cult favorite among dinosaur fans in recent years. Its weirdness, once a source of skepticism, is now its charm. Kids love it. Paleontologists love it. Even robotic reconstructions have tried to capture how it moved and fed. And scientifically, Nigersaurus plays an important role. It helps paleontologists understand diversity within sauropods. It shows that even within a single group, evolution can create wildly different feeding strategies and body plans. It challenges the idea that sauropods were all just giant, long-necked tree munchers. Some, like Nigersaurus, were more like ancient cow analogs, heads low, sweeping up whatever the land offered. So what does this dinosaur really teach us? That evolution isn't just about extremes. It's about finding ways to thrive, sometimes through size or speed, but sometimes through specialization. It teaches us that even the most familiar categories, like sauropod, can surprise us. And it reminds us that in the fossil record, the quiet ones, the grazers, the specialists, the oddballs often have the most interesting stories, because weird doesn't mean wrong. And in the case of Nigersaurus, weird meant perfectly adapted. Hopter 13, the dino with penguin wings, Caudipteryxogen, a dinosaur the size of a peacock, with feathers like a bird, a beak instead of teeth, long legs made for sprinting, and stubby arms that looked like wings but couldn't fly. Now picture it strutting across the muddy flats of what is now northeastern China, fluffing its plumage and pecking at insects, seeds, and maybe the occasional lizard. That's Caudipteryx, a dinosaur so bird-like it was once mistaken for an early bird. But it wasn't a bird. Not quite. Discovered in the late 1990s in the rich fossil beds of Liaoning Province, Caudipteryx is one of the strangest and most important dinosaurs ever unearthed. Why? Because it sits at a turning point in evolution, a snapshot of when dinosaurs were beginning to become birds, yet still retained their dinosaur identity. Let's start with the body. Caudipteryx was small, about 3 feet long from snout to tail. It had a short skull, large eyes, and a beak-like snout, no teeth in the front, though it may have had small teeth further back in the jaw in some specimens. Its body was lightweight, bird-like, and covered in feathers, but not the kind of feathers you'd see on a pigeon. These were symmetrical, simple feathers, especially on the arms and tail. They didn't support flight. They weren't built for lift. They were for something else entirely. Maybe display. Maybe insulation. Maybe even balance. It had long legs and a posture similar to a chicken or pheasant, head forward, tail out, legs tucked under the body, and it could run. Fossilized footprints from similar animals suggest they were nimble, fast runners, darting across open plains and muddy shorelines, dodging predators, chasing prey, or searching for food. But what really threw scientists into a frenzy was the wings. Yes, wings. Not functional wings, more like stumpy arms with feathered paddles at the ends. They looked like the beginnings of bird wings, but they lacked the structure and size to generate lift. They weren't for flying, so what were they for? That question sparked a massive debate. Was Caudipteryx a bird-like dinosaur or a dinosaur-like bird? Initially, some paleontologists thought it was an early flightless bird, a descendant of flying ancestors that had lost the ability to fly, much like modern ostriches or emus. Others argued the opposite, that it was a non-avian dinosaur showing bird-like features, not because it came from flying ancestors, but because birds had yet to evolve from creatures like Caudipteryx. Over time, the evidence leaned heavily toward the second idea. Caudipteryx wasn't a flightless bird. It was a dinosaur that represented a stage just before flight was possible. Think of it as a pre-bird, part of the evolutionary testing ground where feathers and wings were being experimented with for other purposes. Feathers, after all, didn't evolve for flight. They likely began as insulation or display, or for shielding eggs. Flight came later. In Caudipteryx, feathers were already present, but liftoff hadn't arrived yet. This changes how we see the dinosaur-to-bird transition. It wasn't a straight line. It was messy, filled with experiments, and Caudipteryx was one of those evolutionary prototypes. Now let's talk about the name. Caudipteryx means Tail feather. And that's not just poetic, it's literal. This dinosaur had a fan of feathers at the end of its tail, like a showy little plume. That tail fan might have been used for balance, especially during running, or for visual display, signaling to rivals, mates, or predators. It wasn't just decoration, it was functional. Evolution doesn't waste effort. Its arms, though small, still had enough feathers that they formed proto-wings. These were likely used in similar ways, for show, for warmth, or possibly to aid in balance during fast movement. Some scientists suggest they might have used these arms in short bursts to help hop or run faster, similar to how young birds today use their wings to help them scale obstacles. Not flying, but fluttering. And then there's the diet. Inside some Caudipteryx fossils, scientists found small stones in the stomach area, gastroliths or stomach stones. Modern birds like chickens and ostriches use these to help grind up plant material since they don't have teeth. This suggests Caudipteryx had a diet that included a lot of tough plant matter, maybe seeds, fruits, or fibrous vegetation. Though it may have also eaten insects or small prey. It was likely omnivorous. So now we have a fast-running, feathered dinosaur with a beak, stomach stones, and wing-like arms. It couldn't fly, but it was feathered. It looked like a bird, but wasn't one. Its fossils were so well preserved that you can still see the outline of its feathers in the stone, an extraordinary level of detail that lets us reconstruct not just its bones, but its entire body plan. And those fossils tell a broader story. Not just about Caudipteryx, but about the world it lived in. The Yixian Formation, where Caudipteryx was discovered, is a treasure trove of early Cretaceous life. Volcanoes covered the region in ash, rapidly burying creatures and preserving them in stunning detail. This is where the first feathered dinosaurs were found. It's where scientists first began to understand that birds are dinosaurs, that the boundary between the two groups isn't a wall, but a spectrum. Caudipteryx sits in that spectrum. It's the blurry area where one becomes the other. And it forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about how birds came to be. Think about it. This little dinosaur, no bigger than a turkey, holds the key to one of the most profound evolutionary shifts in Earth's history. The moment when a lineage of ground-dwelling reptiles began to lift into the skies. It didn't get there itself, but it helped pave the way. We often picture dinosaurs as giant, lumbering beasts. Toothy, roaring, terrifying. But Caudipteryx defies all of that. It's cute. It's lightweight. It's weird. It has more in common with a magpie than with T-Rex, and that's why it matters. Because if dinosaurs were this diverse, if some were turning into birds while others grew sails, clubs, and crests, then our understanding of prehistory needs to shift. Dinosaurs weren't just survivors. They were innovators. They were experimenters. They were evolving in ways we're only just beginning to understand. And Caudipteryx? It's one of the best windows into that experimentation. So the next time you see a pigeon strutting across a sidewalk, or a chicken pecking in a yard, remember this. You're looking at the descendants of animals like Caudipteryx. Creatures that couldn't fly, but wore feathers. That ran but looked like birds. That bridged the ancient and the modern. Because flight didn't begin in a single moment. It began in stages. With feathers, with wings, with experiments. With dinosaurs that looked like birds before birds were even a thing. And Caudipteryx was one of those pioneers. Chapter 14. The predator with the trumpet head. Cryolophosaurs, the frozen wastes of Antarctica, where ice stretches for miles. And silence rules the landscape. It's hard to imagine a time when dinosaurs roamed. But rewind the clock 190 million years, and the southernmost continent tells a very different story. Lush forests covered the land, rivers meandered through valleys, and in the midst of it all stalked a strange and elegant predator, Cryolophosaurus. Not every day you find a dinosaur with a flamboyant, wave-like crest perched across its forehead like a mohawk made of bone. And it's certainly not every day you find that dinosaur buried in Antarctic rock. That's part of what makes Cryolophosaurus so strange. Not just how it looked, but where it lived. Let's start with the basics. Cryolophosaurus elioti was discovered in the early 1990s during an expedition to the Transantarctic Mountains. The name means cold crest lizard, a nod to both its frozen grave and its bizarre sideways crest. And this wasn't some tiny creature. At around 20 to 25 feet long, it was one of the largest predators of its time, roaming the early Jurassic landscape as a top carnivore. Now, let's talk about that crest. Unlike the straight, vertical crests seen on some hadrosaurs or the head domes of pachycephalosaurs, Cryolophosaurus had a crest that swept sideways, a thin, elaborate wave of bone rising from the top of the skull and curling over the eyes. It looked like a prehistoric pompadour. And no other known dinosaur has a crest quite like it. Was it a weapon? Unlikely. The crest was thin and delicate, too fragile for combat. More likely it was for display. Perhaps it helped males attract mates. Perhaps it helped individuals recognize each other in the dense, fern-covered forests. Maybe it was used to signal dominance or age, or even emotional states. In today's world, birds use flashy feathers, wattles, and crests for similar reasons. Dinosaurs, being their ancestors, likely played by similar rules. What's even more fascinating is how Cryolophosaurus fits into the dinosaur family tree. It was an early theropod, the same broad group that would eventually include giants like T-Rex and even birds. But it lived far earlier than most of the iconic carnivores we know today, and it still bore the marks of that primitive stage. Its skull, for instance, was long and narrow, with large fenestrae, the openings in the skull that reduced weight and gave muscles room to anchor. Its teeth were blade-like and serrated, perfect for slicing through flesh. Its arms, while short, had strong claws, and its legs were built for running. This was not a sluggish predator. It was fast, agile, and powerful, and it had to be, because the environment it lived in was nothing like the icy expanse of modern Antarctica. Back in the early Jurassic, the continent was still attached to what we now call Gondwana, a supercontinent that included South America, Africa, India, and Australia. The climate was warmer, though it still dipped into freezing temperatures. During long polar nights, think temperate rainforest, not Arctic desert, that climate supported a wide array of plant life, conifers, cycads, ferns, and plenty of prey animals. Smaller herbivorous dinosaurs scurried through the underbrush. Early mammal relatives crept through the forest floor. Even primitive flying reptiles likely flapped through the canopy, and towering above it all, Cryolophosaurus stalked the shadows. Its discovery didn't just add a new name to the dinosaur roster. It completely changed the way scientists viewed dinosaur distribution. Until the 1990s, many researchers believed that the cold and dark of the polar regions would have kept dinosaurs away. The presence of a large, complex predator like Cryolophosaurus flipped that idea on its head. Clearly, dinosaurs were not only living in these extreme latitudes, they were thriving. Even more remarkably, Cryolophosaurus is the first carnivorous dinosaur ever discovered on the continent, and one of the first Jurassic theropods ever found with such a complete skeleton. That makes it invaluable for understanding the early stages of large predatory dinosaur evolution. But this dinosaur's story doesn't end with its discovery. In fact, it's just beginning, because Cryolophosaurus sits at a strange crossroad. In evolutionary history, some of its features resemble later ceratosaurs, a group of meat-eaters known for their horns and crests. Others resemble tetanurans, the group that would eventually give rise to all the famous carnivores like Allosaurus, Spinosaurus, and even T-Rex. This mixture of traits makes Cryolophosaurus a kind of evolutionary puzzle. Was it a side branch? A transitional form? or a representative of a whole lineage we have yet to fully understand. Some paleontologists suggest that Cryolophosaurus represents a very early diversification of theropods. It shows that even at the dawn of the Jurassic, predators were already branching into different ecological roles, body plans, and display features. Others argue that we may be missing pieces, that Antarctica could be hiding even older or more bizarre species beneath its ancient ice. And here's another twist. The fossil was found nearly 13,000 feet up in the mountains. How does that happen? Because over millions of years, Antarctica's crust has shifted, risen, and transformed. What was once a river valley became a mountaintop. The bones of Cryolophosaurus, preserved in fine silt and volcanic ash, were lifted to the skies by the slow motion of tectonic plates, a journey nearly as strange as the dinosaur itself. And though it's known from only one partial skeleton, that skeleton is telling scientists a lot. From muscle attachments to skull shape, from leg proportions to feather possibilities, though no feathers have been found yet, every part of the fossil is a clue, a story frozen in time, a whisper from a world now lost beneath the snow. But Cryolophosaurus also forces us to confront something deeper. We often think of dinosaurs as creatures of the tropics, of sun-drenched deserts and fern-filled jungles. But that's only part of the truth. Dinosaurs were global. They were adaptable. They lived in hot climates and cold, on islands and mountains, in swamps and deserts and polar forests. And if a bizarre, crested predator could survive months of winter darkness, chase down prey in the half-light, and still grow to 20 feet long, what else might be hidden in the unexplored corners of Earth's past? That's the power of Cryolophosaurus. It doesn't just challenge our assumptions, it throws open a door into forgotten ecosystems, into climates we never imagined dinosaurs thriving in, into body designs that defy expectations, because nature doesn't follow our rules, evolution doesn't care about categories. And dinosaurs, especially the bizarre ones, are reminders that life is far more creative than we give it credit for. So next time you picture Antarctica, don't just see snow and silence. Picture a dense forest, a distant roar, a flash of movement, and a predator with a bony trumpet crest, weaving between the trees like a ghost of another world. Cryolophosaurus real. And it was magnificent. Chapter 15. The horned giant with vampire fangs. Diablosaurops in the Badlands of Utah, where red rocks stretch beneath a burning sky and wind carves stories into stone. A skull emerged from the dust, a skull unlike anything paleontologists had ever seen. It had horns, it had frills, and rising from its head like twin daggers were two curved, backward sweeping spikes that looked more like vampire fangs than anything you'd expect on a plant-eating dinosaur. This was Diablosaurops, the devil-horned face. And yes, it looked every bit as fierce as its name suggests. But don't let the terrifying appearance fool you. Diablosaurops wasn't a carnivore. It was a ceratopsian, a member of the same family as Triceratops, with a beak for cropping plants and a frill that likely served for defense, display, or both. Yet it wasn't just another copy of its more famous cousin. It was older, stranger, and it was the first known member of its kind to sport that incredible combination of two massive brow horns plus those dramatic curved spikes jutting from its frill. At roughly 20 feet long and weighing around 2 tons, Diablosaurops was no small animal. It moved on 4 sturdy legs with a heavy, barrel-shaped body and a head that could account for nearly a third of its entire length. But what really set it apart was that skull, a grotesque yet fascinating arrangement of bone, horn, and frill that made it look like a medieval war beast designed by nature itself. The horns above its eyes were long, thick, and pointed forward. That part isn't so unusual for ceratopsians. But sprouting from the top edge of its frill were 2 enormous, backward curving spikes, almost like ram horns turned inside out, These weren't subtle little bumps. They were each over a foot long, curling menacingly behind its head. And while they probably wouldn't have been much use in actual combat, they were positioned too far back. Their visual impact would have been undeniable. In life, those horns might have been covered in keratin, making them even longer than the fossil record shows. Imagine that, a horned herbivore, face bristling with forward thrusting points and rearward daggers, moving in herds through the ancient swamps of Laramida, a lost continent that once spanned the western edge of what is now North America. So, what was the purpose of such exaggerated features? It's a question that applies to many ceratopsians, but Diabloceratops adds an extra layer of mystery. The frill was probably too fragile to act as a full body shield, unlike what we might imagine from battle-ready Triceratops, and the horns on the frill seemed to be positioned in such a way that they would be hard to use directly in a fight. That's led paleontologists to believe that these outlandish features were more about show than survival. In other words, this was dinosaur drama, visual display, a walking billboard for strength, status, or reproductive fitness. Some scientists suggest that males and females may have had slightly different horn shapes, sexual dimorphism, or that the horns changed over time with age. Much like deer today grow more elaborate antlers as they mature, perhaps Diabloceratops flaunted its terrifying headgear to tell rivals, "Back off, I've been through a few mating seasons." But display isn't the whole story, because when you look closely at the fossilized bones of Diabloceratops, you start to see the remnants of an earlier lineage. It was discovered in rock layers that date to around 80 million years ago, the Late Cretaceous period, making it one of the earliest known centrosaurines. Centrosaurines were a subgroup of ceratopsians that included the likes of Centrosaurus and Styracosaurus, known for their elaborate facial horns and frills. What this means is that Diabloceratops wasn't just bizarre, it was foundational. It's like catching a glimpse of a famous artist's early work and realizing, this is where the style began. Because here's the thing, dinosaur evolution isn't always about steady improvement. It's about experimentation, branches, dead ends. And Diabloceratops represents one of those critical early experiments in horned dinosaur design, a moment when nature decided to get weird. Its name might sound dramatic, devil-horned face, but it's actually a pretty fair description. And it's worth noting that the name isn't just for flair. Diablo comes from the Spanish word for devil, and it was chosen because of the skull's appearance, not as a suggestion that the creature was malevolent. In reality, this was a slow-moving herbivore, munching on ferns and flowering plants, probably spending much of its day foraging, traveling in herds, and trying to avoid the enormous predators of its time. And those predators were no joke. In the same ecosystems where Diabloceratops lived, paleontologists have found evidence of large tyrannosaurids, early cousins of T-Rex. There were also dromaeosaurs, raptor-like hunters with sharp claws and keen eyesight. A heavy, horned frill may have offered some protection from bites to the neck. But in truth, the best defense may have been numbers. Picture a herd of Diabloceratops moving together, a forest of horns, spikes, and crests, their heads bobbing. As they walk, their bodies casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. To a predator, that many horns might be just enough of a reason to think twice. But as fearsome as they might look, these animals weren't built to fight. Their legs suggest a plodding, steady gait, not a charging run. Their horns, especially the ones on the frill, weren't designed for stabbing. Their eyes, positioned on the sides of the skull, suggest more of a prey animal's panoramic vision, always watching, always alert. Still, that doesn't mean they were helpless. A head swing from an adult Diabloceratops would have had serious force. And if a predator targeted a juvenile, it's easy to imagine the adults closing ranks. Much like modern musk oxen or elephants forming a defensive circle. There's another layer to this story though, one that's rarely talked about. Because Diabloceratops lived during a time of tremendous change. The late Cretaceous was a world in flux. Sea levels were rising. Climates were shifting. Larimedia, the western slice of North America, was a land of swamps, forests, and volcanic uplifts. Plants were diversifying rapidly, especially flowering ones, and herbivores had to adapt to new food sources, new predators, and new competitors. That might explain why we start seeing more experimental forms. Dinosaurs with wild horns, strange crests, unique skull shapes. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing out. And in that game, Diabloceratops was a master. Its discovery, relatively recent compared to other dinosaurs, opened up a whole new realm of questions. What other early ceratopsians have we missed? Are there more transitional species waiting to be found? What was the precise function of each horn or spike? Were these features used in combination, a warning, a lure, a message? We may never know all the answers. But that's what makes Diabloceratops so compelling. It's not just an oddity, it's a mystery. A relic from a time when the rules were still being written. And that's the perfect way to end this journey. Because over the course of 15 chapters, we've traveled across continents and millions of years. We've met dinosaurs that swam, glided, tunneled, and even evolved backward. We've seen horns, sails, claws, crests, and things we never imagined would show up on creatures so ancient. Each one strange in its own way. Each one bending the idea of what a dinosaur could be, and Diabloceratops. It's the grand finale, a beast that looks like a monster but lived as a grazer, a gentle giant with the face of a demon. A reminder that bizarre doesn't always mean dangerous. And ordinary never meant boring. The fossil record is far from complete. New discoveries are made every year. But if one thing is certain, it's this. Dinosaurs were more diverse, more imaginative, and more mind-blowingly weird than we ever dreamed. And who knows? The next strange creature might be waiting just beneath your feet. A devil-faced mystery, frozen in stone, ready to tell its story.